Hi, Walter.
Hi, Henrik.
How's life?
Life is good. No
Yeah,
complaints,
no
even though the weather is
complaints.
gray outside. But
Yeah, same here. But I'm just gonna use a phrase that my mother liked to say, and that is, "It's cold outside, bad weather outside, but it's good weather inside." So I think we're gonna have an interesting conversation ahead of us.
I was
And
looking forward to it.
great. And also it looks that you I think you have set the standard for behind the future going forward. You have a professional setup with a much better microphone than myself, and you also have a lot of books behind you. So I really look forward to the resources that we're going to share at the end of today's session.
Yeah, blame my wife. She's the smart
Yes.
one.
That's what I say as well to my girlfriend. But it's great that we're more people on that. But of course, hello everyone as well. Appreciate you guys joining the fifth episode of Behind the Future. And today I'm sitting down with Walter from Carlsberg, enterprise architect. We're going to talk about their journey with enterprise architecture, how to convince stakeholders internally about building a stronger enterprise architecture capability, and of course, often in this type of sessions, it's very easy to talk about the vision, what we're trying to accomplish, our objectives and those type of things. But today we want to be a little bit practical as well. So we also want to talk about the key lessons learned, the reflections over the journey so far, and what other architects, EA functions, and companies can learn from Walter and Carlsberg's experience. So, a quick introduction of myself. My name is Henrik. I've been fortunate enough to have these conversations over the last couple of months, and I really look forward to learning more about Walter and Carlsberg today.
Thank you. And my name is Walter Hannemann. I'm an enterprise architect in Carlsberg. Uh, and looking forward to talk to you about. And I think I will start with saying that we always have grand plans and visions about enterprise architecture, and I keep saying to my colleagues and a lot of people that this is never going to be done because people ask. This is a lifestyle, so it's a
Mhm.
journey. How can we
Yeah.
learn and improve as we go along? That's the underlying consideration.
Yeah, and before we go forward as well, it was a great comment by Petter and Kaushik. Apologies that there was a lot of spam on the LinkedIn event page as well. Please don't click on those links. Report them. We are working on now removing those posts. But you should get a notification from Ardoq as the company on LinkedIn, and you should click that link and not the links that are posted directly by individual users on the platform or on the event page. So apologies for that. But let's kick things off. So, of course, Walter, can you kind of share a little bit your experience as well within IT? What was your first kind of meeting with IT? You mentioned before we went live here that you're a network guy as well.
Yeah, just because the benefit of being an older guy, right? I've been around since internet was invented,
Yeah.
since before that actually, and that gives you an opportunity to try a lot of different things. And if you survive, then you have all those stories to tell. So I worked in many different things, including coding, long before now, and I always like the intersection between business and IT, how to solve problems. I love solving problems. The bigger and the more hairy, the better. And that's how IT became more and more important because many things today rely on IT to be run or to be executed. Uh, and I also spent almost 20 years of my life running my own companies, having startups, and I think that mentality is also valuable in many cases. So I sometimes define myself as entrepreneur because I
Mhm.
like starting things and being able to kind of delete things when they don't work and try again. So that is the journey. I've been uh, more corporate jobs in the last almost 15 years. I spent quite some years in shipping in companies like Maersk. So I have like a broad perspective. And Carlsberg is my first experience or my first adventure in CPG or consumer goods, as we called, and that is quite interesting, especially because it's so easy to say what Carlsberg does. It was a lot more
Mhm.
complicated to explain what Maersk does, for example. But
Yeah.
Carlsberg, especially in any of the markets that we are present, 40 of countries, it's
Mhm.
super easy to say beer, and you might like it or not, but you know what it is.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that, okay, of course, we're not going to promote, but I'm a big fan of beer, and I'm also a big fan of Carlsberg beer. Just had to say that as well, a disclaimer. But kind of looking at Carlsberg kind of transformation journey as well, because it's very easy to say, like, digital transformation is much of the same. But what kind of being that project from a project led to more of a product led global application portfolio. So when you arrived at the company, what was your impression of that situation as well?
I think first of all, when people ask me about digitalization, Carlsberg, the answer is yes, because it is basically all the box ticked from internal developing our own tools and in some of the areas to e-commerce to cloud journey, which is actually one of the areas that we are very very good. Uh, and then moving to digital workplace and being able uh, to look into more fancy stuff like smart breweries and even kegs that have their own sensors and order new or more beer for the bar when it's running low. That kind of stuff is all checked, and we do a lot of stuff, but it's also a lot in terms of how we operate and how we use the digital tools and data and analytics and the journey about understanding the company uh, better by having all those digital sensors in the company to understand the company as such. So it is a full-fledged digitalization journey. Again, it probably never ends because the moment you are done with one thing, there's a new thing to come about, and of course the challenges that come with it. Cybersecurity is one. The more digital assets you have, the more exposure you have. So we need to take care of that. And also how to operate and ensure that we don't miss anyone in the journey. After all, and this is an important thing, we cannot sell a digital beer. Beer is beer. Don't want to get a virtual beer, right? So that
Yeah.
is an important part of the concept because we don't have a digital product or service as such. Digital for us is how we operate most than anything and how we have a relationship with our internal people, with our customers, and the consumers on the other end.
Yeah. And then just because this is also kind of why we believe enterprise architecture as well is just a strong capability for organizations, because you always need to make sure that you're starting with the high level objectives, right? And especially with an organization like yourself, to quickly understand not just what kind of our product is going to be today. Of course, beer is still beer 5 years from now, but then how can we support the end product? Like how can we support the end delivery to our clients as well? But then again, like we know these stories about the challenges for how a lot of EA functions have been kind of struggling to support the business and the executive management as well. So, kind of from your experience so far with enterprise architects, kind of what are some of the challenges that you're seeing, just for how kind of the IT function and EA function can support the business?
I think I could start by saying that architecture is in many cases a little bit misunderstood because there are so many different kinds of architecture in a company like Carlsberg. So you have what you could call solution architects, you have uh, technical architects, security architects, and so on and so forth. So each of those disciplines, they look at the same things in many cases, but with a different kind of lens, different angle. And combining all that kind of knowledge is the key for enterprise architecture. You need to understand what is the network architect thinking about and doing in his area, and so on and so forth. And translating all that complexity into something that you can talk to people that don't have the same technical understanding and technical knowledge. So you need to be able to translate a lot of technical aspects into business, and then on the other side understand where the business is trying to go. What is the strategy? Where do we have the likelihood or the possibility of making a positive difference in the business, and then making those two things collide in a way that results in some action that is guided by enterprise architecture or influenced by it, but it's not really our job to do it. So it is a quite exciting place because you need to know a lot about the business, a lot about the technology, but don't really change much, but document and show the right way by showing what happens if you do this or that.
Yeah. And often what kind of architects tell me as well, like in the past, they were very technical focused in regards to, how do we structure this, how do we ensure that we have a good understanding of our architecture, and also, of course, as you mentioned, like for many organizations that go to cloud journey, go to cloud strategy as well, understanding how to kind of make that shift. But then what they also started to tell me the last couple of years is also the importance of communication, kind of how to sell, if you will. How do you communicate the value? And they've been recommending more and more kind of books on even selling and communication as well. Like how can I communicate the message to my end stakeholders? And how has that been for you guys? Like how have you seen that importance?
I think it, I mean, a lot of people know that, and I don't want to try to sound smarter than a lot of better and more experienced enterprise architects. But storytelling is usually, as much as we focus on that, is still underappreciated. So being able to tell a story, and especially if you make analogies and design what if scenarios, and being able to explain, okay, if you do this, these are the possible outcomes. If you don't do, or if you do something else, those are the outcomes. But the challenge is when you don't have enough data about what is already in place, it's hard to tell a story, because then it becomes fictional. And in many cases, when you are talking to someone that has been in the company for longer, they are going to challenge you, say, yeah, but no, because this is not how it is. This is not what we have. This is
Yeah.
not how it works. And so the challenge for us has been, okay, how fast and how can we get as much knowledge about the company and the technology and the applications and the business model, to be able to tell a story that is compelling enough so people can listen to you and believe what you are saying.
Mhm.
So I think this is the key thing in terms of trying to get the data that belongs to many different heads and many different functions in one place, so you can actually combine and make a story.
Yeah.
And the thing is, corporate memory is something funny, right? Because it is spread all over the place and you don't really know where to find. And
No.
you need to keep trying different ways until someone tells you something that, hey, this is actually valuable. I'll take that into account.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a challenge to understand how much data you really need to be able to start telling a story that is compelling enough and
Yeah.
trustworthy.
Mhm. And also like a very good question from Peter Lindgren here at in the chat as well. Like, how have Carlsberg integrated the architecture approach in the operating model? But I think a good question before we get to that part as well is kind of where did you guys start? So kind of when you joined the company as well, you joined Carlsberg. What was the impression of enterprise architecture in the organization? Kind of what was the current situation when you joined?
I think this is an excellent question. So we started by looking into our journeys. When I joined Carlsberg in April last year, so I don't have that much history of what happened before. I know that Carlsberg has been different enterprise architecture initiatives in the past. I don't know them, and I cannot say anything about it. The current incarnation of enterprise architecture started perhaps a little bit over 2 years ago, before I joined, with realization that we did a very good job in our cloud migration journey. We basically moved everything we could to the cloud, uh, and we are recognized as one of the leader companies in that journey. We also had a few other initiatives very successfully deployed, for example, data and stuff like that. But then one thing that is critical is Carlsberg is the combination of many different companies that have been joined the group over time. Those companies came with their IT landscape, especially when it comes to ERPs. So we ended up having a large combination of different ERPs in different markets used in different ways. Now, we have an opportunity there, right? Because all the ERPs in a span of 5, 10 years need to be upgraded, replaced, or something. You need to do something about it. So the idea is, how can we do that in a way that avoids the mistakes that we've seen happening in the previous years in other places, like
Yeah.
super complex and super expensive um ERP deployments. We all know those stories. And at the same time, looking into the future, because the 90s or early 2000s way of deploying ERPs is no longer factual. We know that perhaps the ERPs being implemented from now on are going to be the very last time a company implements an ERP, because it's a software as a service, it's a subscription. You don't need
Yep.
to worry about those jagged movements in terms of, okay, you invest like a lot of money in the ERP and you depreciate for the next 5 years and you use the same way for the next 5 years and you start again.
Mhm.
That's probably over. So
Yep.
what do we do now? If we need to look into ERP as a complete different animal than what we have known so far, do we do in a different way? What is the postmodern ERP, as Gartner and some others call it? How can
Mhm.
we do that? So this long story say, okay, that's how we started. Because we need to do that at some point, then let's look into the business operating model and try to understand what are the commodity capabilities that we could explore having the same across all the markets and regions, and what other parts should belong to different applications and different domains, and how to connect those. So
Yep.
the enterprise architecture current incarnation of enterprise architecture in Carlsberg is based on what we call next generation architecture, which is looking into business capabilities that are commodities in the bottom of the stack, and other business capabilities that are free to be interpreted and used in different ways for the markets, things close to the customer and our markets, and then having a data layer that connects all those things. So this is our model, and what we are doing now, and again, when are we going to be over? Probably never. Is actually interpreting that model into what we call our technology and application roadmap.
Mhm.
Does it make sense?
Now,
I hope.
yes, yes, it makes sense. I just have one question here because it's also why kind of justifying the value, right? Kind of the starting point. You also were able to find some quick wins, or not quick wins, because that's relative, but you were able to find some places where you can quickly demonstrate why this is valuable, but then at the same time show them what's in it for them, right? So you're also kind of interacting with the rest of the business to show them like this is what we can deliver for you guys if you can share your data with us, and as a result, we can deliver better insights to you. So it's basically like a circle of life, if you will, where kind of
Yeah.
if you help me with this is going to help you as well.
Yes. So there are two things in there. One is, I think, this conceptual work that we did for enterprise architecture culminated in one thing that is probably our biggest asset that our business and our leadership relate to when it comes to enterprise architecture. We call the conceptual model of the new ERP system Smart Core. So smart core is a concept, and is just that, a concept that everyone in the business is using now. And I think that is super successful, because how many times or how often can you insert a concept in the executive committee conversations? It doesn't happen very often. So I think this is very successful. On the other hand, when it comes to smaller things like all the applications around it, and the ongoing application rationalization landscape and stuff like that, it's a lot more complicated, because it's a large company. Many of our companies and regions operate with a fairly high degree of freedom, so you need to kind of offer something and try to connect to them in a different way than just trying to make a conceptual model. So what we did to improve our knowledge about the existing landscape and create a relationship is try to offer something that they need. For example, and I'm going to give one example of many others. IT security needs to conduct business impact analysis. How do they do that? They need to find a process, a system, and a repository for the information. We are working together to ensure that when they do that, all the information collected is given back to us, to enterprise architecture. So we help them coordinate that information, ensuring that we can actually benefit from the effort they are doing. The more applications they discover, what they use it for, and stuff like that, that information comes back to enterprise architecture. So we think we have a lot of interesting. So that business capability is also realized by this application that we didn't know before. And the thing is, uh, we all know how it is today, right? Some people get a credit card or even a freemium version of a software as a service application somewhere in Uzbekistan and use it. You are never going to hear about it unless you start engaging with people. So the more possibilities or opportunities of engagement that we have, if we can benefit mutually from it, that's what we are pursuing. And that is actually giving back a lot of good information and visibility, which is also important.
Yeah. And if we take it kind of up a notch as well, like what were some of the key priorities? So kind of when you started out, as you mentioned, like this initiative again, or the EA functionality again was built out 2 years ago as well. What were some of the high level objectives that you had in mind for what the EA function could do over the period?
I think the priority, first of all, it's very hard to have any enterprise architecture priorities. I mean, people really, I mean, let's be honest, people really don't care about us. As much as we can offer a lot of things, we know that. But if you think a company like Carlsberg and they have priorities like carbon footprint and share price and stuff like that, I mean, who cares about enterprise architecture? Let's be honest. But the thing is, on the other hand, the priority in the business is okay. We have some aging ERP systems that we need to replace. Okay, that is an important priority. There is a very good overlap, and we can offer something that helps the business to actually find the best solution for the future ERP environment. So that those are the priorities. We try to align our priorities to the business priorities, and then of course, if we see overlaps in terms of uh, business priorities and IT needs, for example, okay, we need to grow the business, we need to be agile. Our current ERP system in a specific market doesn't offer that kind of agility. Okay, that's a good opportunity to actually work together and define. And just to answer a quick question, we are not using any specific frameworks at the moment. So we're trying to be pragmatic and I know this is a very religious discussion, could be, but we are not following a specific framework at the moment.
Yeah, and also just wanted to add there as well because there was a question from Sue Sanders as well, if, kind of what Carlsberg is using to document their assets. And long story short is that they're using Ardoq. But
Yes,
that's all I'm going to say about that. So
it's fair to
if there's
mention.
an
Yeah,
interest, yeah, if just like Walter said as well, like nobody cares about us, is actually the same with us as well. Nobody cares about us; they cares about what we can do for them and how we can deliver value for them. So if you want to find out more about Ardoq, just reach out to us afterwards. I just wanted to touch upon that as well. But then the other thing as well, like from Abibi here as well, like how do you address like a rapid change in customer journeys as well? How do you make sure that you follow that in line with the business? And I think you touch upon it right now, Walter. You said that you need to communicate. You need to
yeah,
communicate with the ones that are out there in the field as well. I'm just reading the questions here. Yeah, the architecture methodology, like just enough architecture and then more around the business objectives and what is suitable for us at that given time. I think it's right. Um, and then kind of a governance model in place. How has that been for you guys, Walter?
um, I think the governance discussion is something that we are constantly having internally as well. For example, how can we ensure that a new application that some parts of the business might wish to use fits into our landscape? And the thing is, uh, some at least some of the enterprise architecture initiatives that we see failing are because they become no function, like no, you are not allowed to do that, no and no. And that is what the one thing that we first of all, we are not doing because we don't have the power to do that. That's a simple way of looking at it, but also because what we need to understand is sometimes people come with specific needs without uh, or they come with specific solutions without we understanding the problem. One thing that we're trying to do is trying to understand what they actually want to achieve. Okay, I want this survey tool. Okay, but we have another survey tool already, or many maybe. How can we engage with them in a way that they understand, and or we understand each other? So what we try to do is ask why. Why do you need this tool? What you are trying to achieve? And then using the business capability model is something powerful, because if we can show that we have already different applications serving the same business capability, we need to understand the nuances about what they are trying to achieve in terms of business outcome, instead of just saying we have something already doing that.
Mhm.
So I think that that is the first part of the engagement, and the second part is uh, ensuring that we align with other initiatives. If you have an initiative, for example, IT security doing business impact analysis, work with them, because they have the mandate to actually ask questions and force people to actually answer. We don't, but if we work together, we benefit from that. And we help them actually achieve by providing a framework, or providing uh, uh, um, an overview of how things work, right?
Yep. And I also saw that you got a shout out there from Joanna, Walter, that I don't have any specific questions. I just want to thank Walter for making my life easier when it comes to finding something in our application portfolio. But you mentioned like capability model as well, and why that is so important. And from my experience as well, I see that the capability model is of course important because as we have learned and what the successful EA functions are telling us as well is that IT is there to support the business, and if you have a capability model in place, it's much easier to understand how IT can support business and how it's impacting when you're making changes. But then, secondly, as well, it's much easier to build engagement if you speak the language of the business. Like, how is this change actually supporting or impacting the business that we have running? So I just wanted to mention that as well. But um, there was a questionnaire as well, or kind of a reflection that a lot of times I hear that EAs are mentioning that they're not applying any specific methodology in their enterprise, and that makes them us a sort of artist adapting knowledge to the case, but not aligning with best practices or frameworks and methodologies. What are your thoughts around that?
I I I, I kind of agree. I think the biggest problem of adopting a specific enterprise architecture framework is that we enterprise architectures might understand it and see the value in it, but it's very difficult to get that explained to other people in like a elevator pitch mode. Uh, and and I think there's always one way or another. Enterprise architecture as a function is risky. You never know when people are going to get tired of you telling them how things should work and not. Uh, and I think the key is ensuring that you align IT to the business model, business operating model, and that is a lot easier said than done. But the fact is, if you try to force IT or IT frameworks or enterprise architecture frameworks into a business model that doesn't really necessarily match, it's going to be super hard, and the chances of success is are very slim. So I think looking into the business capabilities uh, to try to achieve that is both easier because people understand. If you have invoicing is invoicing, and it has the advantage as comparing to processes that changes little over time and over different geographies and different systems. So it in a way, it's, you could say, it's simply a classification of what you have and what you do, and how to combine things into a box that people could see. And then all the technology and all the complexity behind is something that we from IT and the more technical people can look at. So it is basically a framework or a business capability model and stuff like that is a means of hiding the complexity and being able to combine big blocks to tell a story. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And Kaushik here has a good question related to kind of as Carlsberg being the early adopters of cloud. Kind of how does that EA journey go hand in hand with the adoption of new technologies? And then also just the second question as well was basically around. I know that automation is a very big topic, and of course the key dream here is to automate as much as possible so you can just focus on insights. But how has automation been for you guys?
We have a dedicated team to work on intelligent automation, and it's there's a lot of things happening in that space. One thing, and that is a very particular uh, opinion or vision that I have, is that we need to also be careful in terms of not automating stupid process that shouldn't exist in the first place. I mean, a stupid process manually done or automated is still a stupid process. So we need to understand why we're doing things in a specific way. Is there any way of improving that in the first place, and then automating in the same go? So I think it's a little bit of again, asking why. Why do you do that? Why do you need to do that? But
Yeah.
in any case, automating is better, especially because it might release some people from a boring process to actually start thinking uh,
Exactly.
and challenging the process and stuff like that. So I think it's uh, an interesting area, and then we're going to see a lot more than that,
Yeah.
especially when with the incoming changes in the ERP landscape.
Mm. And that's also a big shout out to Victor Kogan here as well. Like in his experience, kind of the capability centric approach is so important. And I'm like, that's the thing, right? If you ask why, it's much easier to understand what are the capabilities or what are the strategy for 2025 and beyond. Like, what are the initiatives that we're looking to do? It's like in my experience, it seems so much easier when you know that and you have context before you kind of take a look at just as you said as well, like a lot of people are looking at the solutions before they actually understand the problems or the current situation at all. um, but then kind of yeah, right, Kumar had a good one here. Stupid automation is what we call garbage in and garbage out. I totally agree because we are the same here at Ardoq as well. Like, I believe that Ardoq is extremely powerful, but at the end of the day, like if you put shit in, you're gonna get shit out as well. I was just a little bit more direct than Rakubar. But how do you manage like business priorities? Like, do you have like these conversations with the different kind of executive stakeholders? Like, how do you facilitate those conversations?
I think if you do, and most of us work in companies that do have a business strategy, you need to look at that and even try to map that into your model. If you can look at the business priorities from the strategic perspective, they are usually very high level. For example, not unnecessary to say, one of the strategic priorities for Carlsberg is selling more beer. Or if you look at the business strategic point, number one 2 years ago was changing from selling beers in bars to beers in supermarkets because all bars were closed. So you need to understand how the business is working. That's why you need to be very curious and try to understand the reality and things affecting the business, and then try to look into that. When it comes to how you do and how you direct and try to document things that are done on the technical side, you need to listen to whoever's paying the bill. And sometimes the priority is just
Yeah.
finding savings, the commissioning stuff. Then you need to say, okay, I think enterprise architecture is a tool to actually have that kind of overview. Say, okay, if you want to see, okay, what are consuming most of our money or resources, you can actually filter the model and see that. And then with that lens on, you can understand what kind of activities can influence and the outcome. And
Mhm.
I think that is what you need to understand. You need to have some underlying data that priorities changing, and it has to be agile. You need to kind of flex the model and look from different perspectives to actually answer questions that might come from our leadership.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree, and I see that we're coming up to the end there as well. Like we could speak for hours. I'm sure of it. But what are some of your kind of key resources that you have endeavored over the last, let's say, 1.5 year through the pandemic? I see that you have a couple of books behind you, so I don't think we have time to go through all of them. But I think communication and start with why is definitely important. Are there any specific things you want to highlight?
I think asking why is and it's a good point there, that asking why sometimes is very confronting, because people don't want to do that necessarily. They don't want to go into detail. I have already done my research. I don't want to answer those questions again. But I think it's if you demonstrate curiosity, you don't need to ask why directly, but demonstrate, try to understand what you are dealing with. I think that's a critical thing. And when it comes to reading and stuff, I think one of the key things for an enterprise architect is to be open to trends. Try to understand everything that is going on around you, not only in your company and technology, but everything, right? For example, if you have never been interested for remote work and digital workplace, when the pandemic hit, then all of a sudden you need to change a lot in your life. If you have already, uh, as Carlsberg did before the pandemic, work on making people more flexible and stuff like that, is a lot easier. So try to always get new trends into your thinking, into your what if scenarios. What if this happens? And then you are prepared. And I think one of the books that I read some time ago that I really found interesting. um it's the book is called Lovability. It's written by founder of a company that deals with product management, that's called AHA. Uh, and the thing is, uh, the whole point of the book is how can you make sure that you use technology to have a relationship with people. And that applies to enterprise architecture. If you use technology to avoid talking to people, they are not going to talk to you. So
Yeah.
all the frameworks, and this applies to frameworks and IT tools and Ardoq included, try to make the tool a way of having a relationship and not to avoid a relationship. I think that was a very big learning, or a very very big quote in terms of making sure that you have a relationship, because without those relationships you're not going anywhere.
Yep, and of course, and I think Yemen had a very good reflection there as well. Like, you need to ask why 7 times to actually figure out what's the why. I think that was good, and then also Jamie McHugh, a great question here. What is what is the best way to build a capability model when you're starting from a blank canvas, or if you're starting from scratch? So was this something that was already defined for you guys? Just a
No,
last reflection on that. No.
no, we started from scratch, and I'm not sure if there's a best way. It's very hard, because when you talk to most people, especially when it comes to capabilities that reside typically in the ERP scope, people are going to say, "Oh, that's not how we do it." I say, "Okay, tell me, explain me how you do things, and what is the very end thing that you deliver when you are done." Because if you try to go the other way around, people don't get it. So I think if I have any recommendation or any advice for business capability, we understand that how is a process, the what is the capability, but it's very hard to make people understand that. So get the process, sit with the people with the process in hand and say, okay, explain the process, and then you say, oh, okay, so by the end of all this process, that's what you have. Yeah, okay, you have your capability. Maybe you need to double click and work a little bit more, but that's basically the only way to actually understand those things.
Mhm. And then last question from my side, and I also kind of want to give a big shout out to your wife as well for borrowing the podcast equipment for today's episode. So the sound was good. But what is one of your biggest learnings through your career so far? So regardless of enterprise architecture, but just like within IT and in the business, what have you seen that has been important?
um, I think is being empathic, because uh, in many cases, and I don't want to sound cocky or anything, but in many cases we do know better, because in many cases is the stuff you do, and you can see miles ahead because you have already spent years of your life collecting data and understanding what happens if you do something like this. But if you come out like as a no better person, people are going to not
Yeah.
engage with you. So being empathic and try to understand life from the other perspective, I think is the, and it might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but I think that that is the key. You don't
Yep.
build relationships by I know better, even if
Yep.
you do, and I know you do.
Exactly. It's the same as my dad told me as well. Like, there's a reason why you have two ears and one mouth. I'm not saying that I'm very good at it, but it's like I think it's a good advice, and I think it's good for architects as well. Yeah. But brilliant, Walter. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I hope it was valuable. Thank you so much for all the questions and the reflections in the chat. The reflections or the questions that we did not have time to cover, we will make sure that Walter and I follow up with them, responses to them afterwards, and also share the resources that Walter talked about. And if there's any other questions as well, let us know. And then a call to action there as well. We're hosting our annual Ardoq Tech Fest, where it's basically like a larger event like we did now. We're going to talk about industry examples, experiences from similar organizations and companies. So if you have time to join, we will also add a link to that event. And I'm promising you, it's no fishing from our side. It's a real event. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye, Walter.